Hey everybody, welcome to the Ryan Stick Show. Thank you so much for checking out my channel and welcome Psycho Goreman fans. Now, before we begin today's festivities, I must give a special shout out to my buddy Sean. That's him right there, that handsome fellow with the Psycho Gorman poster that he got for me at a convention out of town. He also got me these other lovely collectibles. And Sean, I love you. But it's also Sean's birthday today. That's why we're putting out this episode today, because without Sean, this episode would not happen. He is the one that set this up. Thank you so much, Sean. Now, without further ado, let's begin this interview with the special effects master, the director, writer, and producer of Psycho Goreman, Stephen Kostanski. Let's go. Oh, first of all, sweet theme song.
Ryan Stick Show. It's the Ryan Stick Show. Ryan Stick Show. It's the Ryan Stick Show.
Many moons ago, a nameless evil was imprisoned in a place far beyond reach.
Hurry up!
If he were ever to be released, it would spell certain doom for all existence.
Is that fear I smell? Your planet will be torn to pieces, and I will
Mimi,
treat your
look!
angry screams as I rip.
Is this yours? Speak? Oh my god.
I was watching this movie, and even from the trailer, I said to myself, I think this movie might be made for me. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, I find we are kindred spirits in a sense, because I think you grew up with all the same stuff I did. And I just got to ask you about this. Are you familiar with the Monster Squad?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I love that movie. Though it was also traumatizing for me as a kid because I would get real sad when Frankenstein got sucked into that portal at the end. And also, that's right, I'm hard committing to just calling him Frankenstein. I'm one of those people. You can argue semantics with me. I don't care. He's
Hey,
Frankenstein.
Phoebe called him Frankenstein as he was being pulled out of her fingers, okay? So, we're going through Phoebe logic here. And she's the one that saved the world.
But I have very vivid memories of being a kid and like crying at that sequence because I just loved Frankenstein so much in that movie. And so to like lose him at the end was really traumatizing. And that's definitely something that among a lot of things, there's a lot of influences, but like that sequence in Monster Squad was definitely something that I wanted to have just a little hint of in PG, a little bit of that heart, I think, is what really makes these movies memorable. So I want to put as much heart into the film as possible.
Well, there is a lot of heart, and there's also kind of a lot of it's a reverse Monster Squad in a way, because instead of Phoebe being this little sweet girl that they're like, why don't they let her hang out with them? In this movie, you have a terror of a little sister who's got so much charisma and personality that she's essentially could be the heel of this movie, but you can't stop watching her. Do you have a little sister like that? Where did this character come from?
No, I mean, the character just kind of grew organically out of me coming up with the story because in my mind, this plot wouldn't work if you had like a Phoebe or like an Elliot from E.T. Like, you can't have like a sweet, good-natured kid stand against such evil. It's like it became fun to me when I realized like the character basically needed to mirror PG, but as a small child. Like PG is the evil overlord of the universe, and Mimi is the evil overlord of Spengler Springs.
The gem of Paraxidike. Whoever wields it is able to command me.
Go over there and wait for us to come back in the morning.
You will suffer an eternity for this.
And so once I hit on that idea, I just drew on personal experience, like lots of siblings of friends and things, cousins. I just have so many memories of kids being like shitty. And it's something that I don't feel like these movies tap into enough, is that kids can be little maniacs. But not, it's like a multifaceted thing. It's not just black and white, like good kid, bad kid. Similar to PG himself, it's like there's a lot more going on. And I just like the idea of having a layered character of a kid that isn't just absorbing stuff that's happening and just looking in wide-eyed wonder as things are playing out. Like I call it the Harry Potter syndrome, where it's just like a kid walking through a fantasy space, like looking around, being like, "Oh wow, pictures are coming to life." Like I wanted a kid that was so strong-willed and so like in their own world that they were not phased by anything, which seemed way more accurate and was essentially what Nita and Owen were on set to begin with. Like they were not phased by any of the monsters, as you would assume a child would be. It was just business as usual to them.
I like how you refer to Psycho Gorman as PG all the time because I thought that was very witty, where everyone's aware of the parental guidance and the PG-13 and how kind of in the 80s children's entertainment was just a little out there. You know, it's very bonkers. Like there's some really dark scenes. Everyone talks about Goonies, but a movie I love is Guyver. And Guyver is kind of like Power Rangers on acid. And you know, there's a lot of goofy elements like sound effects, but at the same time, there's straight up murder. So it's just
Yeah,
like sometimes you watch these movies, you're like, who are these movies made for? And I like how you intentionally did that this time. You're like, oh, I know who this is made for.
yeah. I want to make like a kids movie for adults, the kind of movie that I'm just not seeing out there anymore. And yeah, very much in the vein of something like Guyver, or even like Masters of the Universe, or like Aliens, like movies that have strong iconography that kids would gravitate towards. RoboCop's another good example.
Oh
And
yeah.
as a kid, like watching that, you're all excited because, like, yeah, Robot Cop, that's cool. It's a very like easy, simple thing to latch onto. Uh, but then you have like that guy being melted by toxic waste, and you have Ed 209 blowing that guy away in the boardroom. It's all this traumatizing stuff that I think is like a experience growing up that a lot of us had. That I don't know if like kids are having that anymore, where you're
Yeah.
like watching a thing that is fun and appealing, but is also a little dangerous and maybe freaks you out more than you want to be freaked out. Like it makes you uncomfortable and stays with you. And I don't know. I just feel like all those experiences I had growing up have just informed my creativity and my passion for wanting to make movies and make monsters. So I wanted to inflict that on a new generation of kids. Like I hope that there's like some 8-year-old out there that's watched this and maybe got a little freaked out and maybe like didn't sleep so great that night, but still can't stop thinking about it and wants to make their own monster movies.
Yeah, well, you certainly put your mark on this and really pulling back from the past. You know, in the past, there's no, as the audience knows, there's no CG, and if there was any CG, independent movies that we loved could not afford it. The practical special effects in this movie are just absolutely bonkers. Can you take me through that? Because I loved how everything on screen I felt I could touch, and it's squishy and oozy
Yeah, well,
and
that's
gross.
like that tactile quality is what makes practical effects so important in this kind of movie. As much as I love CG, I think there's lots of great movies that use it to great effect. It doesn't really pull me in the same way. Uh, as a kid growing up watching monster movies, uh, I was fascinated by the creatures in them because I wanted to know like how they were made, and I think that's a key element with practical effects. Is you see it and you go like, how did they pull off the magic trick that is that gremlin or that Terminator? Like you see it and you wonder how it was done, which I think is a crucial component. So that's
Hmm.
why I love practical effects. That's why I got into doing practical effects because I just liked the magic quality that it had. That like kind of power of illusion that comes with doing makeup effects and creature effects is you're like pulling the wool over people's eyes and convincing them something's there that actually isn't, in a way that yes CG can also do, but you see it and you just know that a computer made it, whereas you see like the guy transform into the Guyver in those movies and you wonder like, oh, how did they like you know it's fake, but you still wonder like how did they pull that off to like sell the visual of it. So that's what I like about practical effects.
Big shout out to my friend Sean Bradley, who's the reason why we're talking today. Sean's a big fan of Guyver as well. And I was telling him, oh my God, if you like Guyver, you guys see Guyver too, dude. That is where it's at. And
It's
it's
the
kind of funny.
superior of the two films for sure, in my opinion. Well, I was trying to capture the vibe of watching Guyver 2 as a kid. I remember my mom renting it back in those days, she would just rent like a stack of movies to take out to our cottage every weekend. And it was just in that stack because she saw the cover, saw the Guyver suit on the cover, and was like, "Oh, this looks like a Power Rangers kind of thing. Like Steve will like this."
Same. Yeah.
Not realizing that it's a very adult movie that yes has like creature effects and on paper seems like kids would like it, but it's also brutally violent. And so watching it and like seeing Guyver like murder people in the opening scene, like he like slits that guy's throat. Yeah, seeing that at the end of that sequence was a real shock as a kid, and I wanted to inflict that kind of reaction on the audience with PG of having cool looking creatures doing kicky punchy stuff and having sparks going sometimes, but then other times having blood spray and heads get ripped and people getting eaten alive.
If I'm not mistaken, I think the director of Guyver 2 is also the director of the Power Rangers movie because they recycled some of the scenes, like I think the big jump and Neil in a reverse jump, and they also the multiple kicks when he's going and he's going. "Duh, duh, 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 duh."
There's certain moves in that movie that I think carried into other like stunt and creature suit heavy features because I know that kick that he does where he like spins and he swings one leg and he kind of does like a fake out. He misses deliberately with one leg only to come back and kick with the other.
Yeah.
It's called the Guyver kick because we actually use that kick in PG. Dark Scream does it at one point, and that's very much a Guyver 2 moment that we want to reference because Alex, our like stunt and fight coordinator who also played Darkscream is also a huge Guyver fan, so we wanted to like milk that for all it was worth.
Oh, awesome. You have no idea how much you're making me happy. And big shout out to my buddy Jake Gunn, who actually had a question for you. If you don't
Sure.
mind me asking. Jake is a huge Guyver fan. And he's also a huge Psycho Gorman fan. So you're really tapping in to everybody you are intentionally wanting to reach with this film. They've heard the call and they're answering it because you've definitely found your audience. But as I pull this question up that I'm going to ask on his behalf, there's a little bit of a nod to the Power Rangers theme in the beginning when they're playing Crazy Ball. Can you tell me about that decision? Because I love it.
Yeah, there's definitely an intentional reference to that from the composers because yeah, it was like when we were kind of crafting what the score would be, Power Rangers was definitely on the list, mixed with like the first Ninja Turtles film. The score to that is really fantastic and
I know, right?
was like a temp track for a good chunk of the movie. But yeah, we thought it would be fun to have a kind of riff on the Power Rangers theme for Crazy Ball, and then have a reprisal of it at the end of the film. I think it's super fun and like gives that scene its personality.
First of all, you mentioned the first Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film, which I still find is one of the best 10 movies I've ever seen in my life to this day. Like,
Oh, it's
I
great.
watch it now with more admiration than I ever did as a kid. As a kid, I'm like, "Oh, it's slow sometimes." And I'm like, "Oh my god, this is dark."
It's a very adult kids movie, and yeah, it's dark and like mature in ways that aren't juvenile, if that makes sense. Like I feel like it's a way more like thoughtful movie and a way more deliberately paced movie than you would expect a Ninja Turtles film to be. Like you compare that to like the when it kind of like 2014 or whatever, like the Michael Bay produced one, where
Yeah.
the attitude was just like more set pieces and more insanity, and I don't know if that's really the answer. Like people have a lot of nostalgia for that original film, and I think because it holds up as an actual like good movie aside from just being a Ninja Turtles film. So I have a lot of admiration for it. I think it's like a good template of what you can do with a comic book property and a way to like translate it to film without it just being a sequence of set pieces and just action.
I'm glad you said that because in that first Ninja Turtles movie, there's this great thing where they're recruiting teenagers, like runaways and kids with troubles, to become the Foot Clan. And it really makes you think everybody the Ninja Turtles are punching in the face is somebody's kid
Yeah,
that ran away from home. And that is messed up. And it really puts some stock into who are you punching? and really like building up the villains. But your movie is essentially what in some would some consider in the galaxy a big villain, but then you kind of find out, hey, there's some bigger jerks in the world that he became a villain as a result of. You know, there's no clean cut good and evil in this film as much as we'd think.
Yeah, I am a big fan of the idea of like undermining whatever we perceive as being the like good authority in the world. And I think like I've obviously like kind of tied religious imagery and things into that as well with the Templars. Like the idea of like all these things that on paper should be good are actually the villain because of how they're being executed is like an interesting concept that I want to explore with PG, and
Mhm.
also just the like themes and ideas of like structure and order and even just like kind of mechanical versus organic, like the idea of Templars. The Templars are kind of these like kind of cyborg things versus PG, which is a very organic kind of like of
Hmm.
the earth of Gygax kind of creature, um, and just kind of like subverting the idea that the like chaotic organic thing is the bad guy and having it really be the like structured order bound like religious robot kind of like priest as the actual villain. Like I just find like subverting those kind of traditional images in different ways was a lot of fun with this movie.
Wow, I didn't even see the organic and robotic connection, but that's actually that's really interesting. Um, Another thing about this movie that kind of like you were talking a little bit about how some movies can scar you a little bit. I would have been scarred when the nice kid gets turned into a brain, and and is very sad about it. You know, he never kind of like he's never is like, "Oh, awesome, I'm a brain." He's kind of like, "When am I gonna get turned back?" I like the fact you kind of don't magically turn him back. I mean, even the movie The Witches, the kid gets turned back into a mouse, and that pissed Raoul Dahl off so much. He wanted his name off the script because in The Witches originally the kid is not supposed to be turned back into a human, but you had the integrity to make that brain kid just stay a brain. And tell me about that. Did anyone try to fight you on that?
No, I mean everybody liked that punchline of having this kind of like crazy thing happen to one of our kid characters, and then he's just brushed off. Like he does not factor into the plot, and going out of our way to forget about him just to remember him in the last shot of the movie to be like, oh right, that was a thing that happened. Because I think that's like another like theme that carries through the movie is this idea of like not really acknowledging the consequences of anything that's happening. Because it's a movie that, as I was writing it, I realized like you could really get into the weeds with like what what's how's the town dealing with PG? How's the country dealing with PG? Like what happens when they go out into public? You could really easily get bogged down in figuring out the logic of that and trying to make it like quote unquote realistic. And so I love the idea of just hard committing to like it's just going to go where I want it to go, and whatever happens happens, and I'm not going to be too concerned with worrying about the effects of things, but only worrying about them when they become a punchline. Like having the cops show up to be completely useless like really speaks to that idea of like they should have shown up like way earlier in the movie, like I don't know, maybe when PG blew up that kid on the bike. But I like kind of snarkily acknowledging that while also being like I don't give a shit about that, and having PG just dispatch them instantly as a way of showing like these normal the like normal structure and rules of the world don't apply in this movie, and when they do show up, they're going to show up just so I can shit on them and then move on. And so Alistair is also that, where it's like, yeah, something bad happened to this character and he's real sad about it, but I'm really not interested in solving his problem. I'm interested in solving PG and Mimi's problem. Like they're the central story in this movie. I'm going to follow that story, and whatever happens to Alistair, I don't really give a shit about. And if anything, just use it to find more humor in the aftermath of PG's adventure on Earth.
I like you say aftermath. But there's a comic book in the works that I believe is a prequel by Lethal Comics, and I actually subscribed to the Kickstarter. Tell me about how you got involved with, or how they reached out to you about Psycho Gorman. I mean, Lethal Comics for life.
We've been talking for a bit about, like, how do we expand on the PG story? Do we do a comic? Do we do a video game? And Andy reached out. He's a friend, a film programmer and producer friend of mine, Peter Koplowski. And so Pete really pushed hard for Andy to take on the project. And at first, I got to admit, I was skeptical at the idea of doing a Kickstarter. We'd done one for The Void back in 2015, and that really stressed me out. Doing crowdfunding is not a fun experience, in my opinion. But Andy was just so enthusiastic and passionate. Like, I could not say no. So, we partnered up to make this anthology comic that totally blew past its goal. Like, I'm so happy that people are excited to contribute and be a part of it. So many great artists are involved, and it expands upon the universe in the way that I want to be expanding upon it, where it's kind of like the Star Wars extended universe stuff from the 90s. Like, my pitch to Andy was that it needs to be like those novels, those like anthology books, like Tales of the Bounty Hunters, Tales from Jabba's Palace, Tales from Mos Eisley's Cantina, where
Cool.
where it's like, oh, that character, like, that you saw for one scene, like, let's expand on their story. So the premise of this comic anthology is that it's all the alien council members sitting around during the movie. Pandora has left. She's gone to go deal with PG on Earth, and while these aliens are all sitting around this like boardroom board, they're discussing their experiences with PG. So it's like, hey,
Oh,
tell me about the time you almost got killed by PG. And so we kind of jump into these different stories as they're trying to like one up each other on like, well, I had a way crazier experience with him. So the through line of PG is that he's like the villain in all these stories, causing havoc, and each of these aliens is telling their different experiences with him. And so each story is a different writer and a different artist, with like a wraparound story to tie it all together, plus a few extra random stories thrown in. There's like a Biocop story, Witchmaster from the Paladins Obsidian, the PG's like former crew of villains. She has a story that's really wacky and nuts that I'd love to adapt into a full movie because it's so weird. Yeah, it's supposed to feel like a heavy metal comic where it's an anthology with different art styles, different writing styles. So it's just like a real mishmash of stuff. And I'm so excited to actually like physically have it in my hands. I'm really excited. I think it expands on the universe in a really fun and exciting and satisfying way.
I'm glad you brought Biocop because my buddy Jake Gunn, like I said before, who is a big Psycho Gorman fan, big Power Ranger fan, big Guyver fan, just pretty much, your people, our people, I should say.
Nice.
He asked two questions, and one of them, a quick one, and then one about Biocop. He said, "Could the Power Rangers defeat PG?"
No. It's going to be, I think, my hard stance on that. I don't think they stand a chance.
I don't think they could beat Mimi at this point either, to be honest. But
And also, like, let's be real. At the end of PG, we see him grow giant and shoot like heat rays out of his hands. So I think he could take on the Zords as well in all of their forms.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna hard commit that PG would beat up the Power Rangers. And I mean, if was it Saban or whoever owns the rights wants to do a crossover at some point, I'm more than happy to entertain that and prove
Amazing.
myself right in that assessment that he would kick their asses.
Also, was it just his love for the character Biocop to include him in the movie, or were there other factors?
Well, I mean, I'm constantly being hounded, even like almost like a decade after the fact, about doing a Biocop movie, and this was my way of, trying to satisfy those fans that really want to have more Biocop in their lives. And at that point, when I was writing the script, I wanted something to come in to just shake up the plot a bit. And so the idea of Biocop showing up and being his usual miserable self seemed really entertaining to me at the time. And also as me just slowly building the Steve Kostanski extended universe of movies and characters. So it'll all build to some Avengers level crossover in 10 years if somebody wants to give me $100 million to make that movie. So yeah.
Amazing. He said, and finally, just praise him for Manborg. It was fantastic.
Oh,
You've done
thanks.
a lot of stuff there, Steve. I mean, like, you're not, you didn't just make this movie out of the blue. You've been at this a while. Um, with that, I think it's a good time to actually ask, when exactly did this idea come to pen and paper? Because this comes from you. You're the writer, you're the director, you're the
Yeah.
producer.
It was a few factors that led to this happening. I had just finished on Leprechaun Returns. I was coming back from South Africa from shooting that, and
Mm.
a friend of a friend was interested in financing a feature film for a low budget, but enough of a budget for me to work with and make something wacky and crazy. They were Manborg fans specifically and wanted something in that vein. So I took a few ideas that I had floating around in my head and kind of mashed them together. I'd had the image of a monster sitting at a drum set in my head for a very long time. I thought it was like very charming. So I like worked that idea into the plot and kind of fleshed it out into this idea of like an ET. If ET was pure evil kind of scenario. It was a little bit inspired by Rawhead Rex as well. I had bought that fancy Blu-ray that came out a few years back of it, and was watching Rawhead Rex and getting bored because, no offense to the Rawhead Rex heads out there, but that movie is slow as hell. And so I'm just sitting there bored, coming up with ideas of like, well, how would I do this? Like, what's the Steve Kostanski version of this? And that's when I like mashed it with the ET idea of like, well, okay, you resurrect this ancient evil, but then you have him team up with kids and go on silly adventures, but keep him evil all the way through. And so once I landed on that idea and the like kind of twist of him not really becoming better or anyone becoming better throughout the movie and everybody just staying kind of their weird, quirky, evil selves, is kind of what made the movie what it is today.
My favorite scene in the entire movie is when Mimi gives him a bunch of magazines and it's like, here's a magazine with a bunch of sexy guys, a bunch of hunky guys.
Petty displays of wealth. How can your short lifespans allow such narcissism?
Yeah, but look at all the hunky boys.
I do not care for hunky boys. Or do I?
How did that scene come about? Because it's brilliant.
It's such a throwaway moment. It's crazy to me that people have latched onto it so
There's a
much.
shirt of that on cavitycolors.com.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
like there's a shirt of it.
Oh, I have the shirt. It originally didn't even have him going, or do I? It was just that on the page, the joke was just, it's PG saying hunky boys. That's funny. Like, this
Yeah.
is just a very simple idea of like him just parroting back whatever Mimi says in his voice. But just as I thought about it and as I was doing revisions and changing things, I liked the idea of just throwing that in, of him actually questioning his sexuality for a second. And everybody on the production like just was so on board that moment that we pushed it to its limit on the day. Like, I think the original cut we held on that take even longer for like another like 3 seconds. Because it's just that zoom in on him is so funny and so goofy that we want to really get the most out of it. But yeah, it's just one of those things that like it was the nice organic combination of what's on the page with Matt's performance, with Steve Lajos's performance as PG's voice, with Andy's shooting, the way he shot it. It just all worked together to make what apparently is a magical cult classic moment. So yeah, I'm really happy that such a small thing blew up into such a big thing with that sequence.
And I can't hold you all day, but you've graciously given me a lot of your time, and I appreciate that so much. But I gotta ask, my favorite character in this entire film is Greg,
Better than me, huh?
and Adam Brooks's performance is just absolutely brilliant. Tell me a little bit about, like, the involvement of the useless dad. I love it so much.
I mean, it's a character that like I would normally have trouble writing if I didn't already have Adam in mind for the character, because I feel like I just mind a lot of things that he's done before in past Astron 6 productions.
Find me! Find me or you all die!
Like there's definitely a bit of like Kyle Naniska from HIZ, a little bit of Stamp from Laser Ghosts. He just does pathetic so well in his performances that I wanted to give him a character to just go like full sad dad in a way that we'd not really given him the opportunity to do before. And yeah, it was just so much fun working with him. I'll take any opportunity to cast those guys, Adam, Matt, and Connor, in anything, because they're just such great actors and bring so much to the table and are so much more like clever than me at spinning dialogue into something that's like charming and real. And I feel like that's something that Adam definitely brought, was he made like the kind of goofy, stilted dialogue that I wrote into something tangible and relatable. And so, yeah, he really worked his magic on this movie. I'm really grateful that he agreed to do it, because it's the kind of thing where, like, if he turned down the role, I don't even know if I'd want to make the movie, because I just liked having him around. It's like he's just a comforting presence to me at this point, having people that I've worked with for so long. And especially like something like Leprechaun, where I'm on the other side of the planet making a movie with people I'm, not super familiar with, like all new, fresh faces, like, and had a great time, but it still wasn't the same as just working with the people that you grew up making movies with. So I've been making stuff with Adam since like the mid 2000s. Like, he's one of my oldest filmmaking friends, and I cast him in everything I make if I could. So yeah.
I'm a big fan of his. After this film, I gotta say I'm a huge fan. It's kind of interesting that you made a Leprechaun movie where it was just like, okay, let's get him out of space, let's make this scary again, let's do this. But at the same time, if you had Leprechaun versus giant, like, scaly slime monster, you would have been right at home. So it's
To
kind
be
of
honest, like I
huh.
was kind of hoping they would want to follow up with like him in space or something more insane. So yeah, it's funny that I got tasked with making like kind of a
The Batman Begins of leprechauns.
yeah,
Yeah.
like a very back to basics leprechaun that
Mm.
is the only one that's not completely insane. So I had to make it insane in my own way by just beefing up the gags as much as possible. But
Yeah.
fingers crossed, Lionsgate will someday wake up to the charms of Leprechaun again and put him in space, and maybe Adam can be in space with him as well.
Amazing. Hey, thank you so much, Steven. This has been absolutely wonderful today. I'm not sure what the future of Psycho Gorman has in store, but if you can enlighten us or just let the fans know how they can participate, help move it along, anything, and where to find you online.
I mean, honestly, like the fan support has been so great so far. Like everybody just keep doing what they're doing, uh, and just don't. Most importantly, don't forget about PG, because we're in an age where people, media and content has a short lifespan, and I'm blown away by the fact that this movie came out almost exactly a year ago this week. So people are still talking about it, which is awesome. So just like keep the conversation going and keep it in the public eye as best as possible, because that'll just help. It'll help me convince people to actually give me money this time to make a follow up. So yeah, the more the more presence it has on social media and online, the better. And so you can follow me at kill_Kostanski on Instagram. That's my kind of like primary spot for posting behind the scenes stuff and interacting with people. That's the best spot to reach me at. And yeah, just everybody keep doing what you're doing, and stay tuned for future PG stuff.
It was nice meeting you.
It would be nicer if you were dead.
All right, bye.
It's the